In last lecture, we learned about the differences between observational studies and controlled experiments. Well, in this lecture, we're going to learn about why controlled experiments are favored over the observational studies. So let's take an example that I could have seen in the newspaper this morning, a shocking headline that says, people who wear dentures are 10 times more likely to die in the next 5 years than people who don't wear dentures. So let's think first about causation. And this is just an observational study, right, where these researchers compared a group of denture users who already were prescribed dentures by their dentist compared to denture non-users who've never had to put in dentures in their lifetime. And they observed that the denture users were more likely to die within 5 years of first being observed than the denture non-users. The first thing that a researcher is going to want to look for is causation. A causal link that can connect our treatment to our response. So this causal link answers the question, how? How would the treatment lead to this response? And it shows causation. That's why we call it a causal link. So in this example, we would say that dentures are our treatment, wearing dentures. So here we have wearing dentures. So wearing dentures is our treatment. And what was our response that we observed from this study? A higher likelihood of death in the next 5 years. So we see death within 5 years. So people who are wearing these dentures are more likely to die in 5 years. So these researchers wanted to have a causal link to show how this is working, so that when they make their public announcement to the denture-wearing population to pop out their dentures, they can say, why? Why? What is it about the dentures that's killing us? So we have this causal link that's leading from the dentures to death. Now what we would put as this causal link, let's think about it. What is it? What could be a potential causal link linking denture use to death? What's dangerous about dentures? So there's a couple possibilities. Let's think about when you put in those, we see denture commercials, the people on the commercials are always complaining about the adhesive, the yucky adhesive that they have to put in their mouth, basically a glue, gluing your teeth to your gums. So what if there was some kind of toxin in this glue, this hidden toxin that's the silent killer of so many denture users? That could definitely be one. So let's pop that in as our causal link. Let's say that when you wear dentures, that you have a toxin in the glue. And this toxin that we see in dentures will kill you within 5 years. Rapid death. So that would be a causal link connecting A to B, how the dentures kills you. It explains that question of how, showing causation, so that when the researcher can get on TV, they can blame it on this glue that is in the dentures and warn people against wearing dentures because of the glue. That's how it works. Now, there could be other possibilities. Let's think of others. People who wear dentures are not able to eat steak, let's say, other meats. There are other tough meats and vegetables that denture users are warned against using because it might break their dentures or get in between their dentures and their gums, causing an infection later, decay. So perhaps malnutrition could go in our causal link box. The people who wear dentures, the wearing dentures prevents you from eating the healthy foods you need to survive, leading to death. It explains how it works. It's the mechanism through which dentures will kill you. So you could, on your own, think of a few other examples that could also go and explain the causation between these two. Now, most researchers would be happy to stop there and just publish their paper and go on a vacation. But in Stat 100, we're more diligent. We go deeper. We think, wow, what if there's a third variable that we're not listing here? What if there's some lurking variable making it look like the dentures are killing people? What if there's some confounder, let's say, a confounder that leads to this response that we're seeing, but is also strongly associated with the treatment? making the easy researcher, the lazy researcher, say that those two are just directly related and causation is proven. What if there's a third variable, making it look like the treatment is the guilty culprit, when really it's just hiding behind a subject that hasn't been examined yet in our study? So a confounder is this lurking variable that no one has identified yet in the study, and that it is associated with both the response and the treatment. Well, let's go back to our denture example and see if we can find something to fit in this confounder box. Well, how do we identify a confounder? Let's start there. Identifying confounders. So how do we go about identifying a confounder? If it's this hidden variable that nobody's ever thought of yet, if it's hidden, how do we find it? Well, we want to compare our two groups, our treatment group and our comparison group, for other possible differences that could result in this response and be associated with the treatment. Other differences besides the treatment that could result in seeing this response. So let's just make a quick diagram of our denture users. So this is my treatment group that I observed as the denture users, and I'm going to compare them to the non-denture users that I was comparing them to. And the first thing we saw was that denture users were more likely to die. That there was a imminent death, right? While non-denture users were more likely to live beyond 5 years. Now, aside from those differences, and of course our treatment, this group received the treatment, and this group did not receive the treatment of dentures. So they differ in two ways immediately. They differ in whether or not they received the treatment, and they differ in whether or not they saw the response. Are those the only two differences between denture users and denture non-users? Let's go to the audience and see, can we think of any other differences?
Wait a minute. I'm a little confused. You said the denture users were given the treatment and the non-denture users were not given the treatment. Did they choose it themselves, or were they given this? I'm a little confused.
Great question, because you're right, a researcher didn't go into the dentist's office and assign denture users to denture use, and assign denture users to non-denture use. No, these groups were already divided by circumstance, by the circumstances that they were already living in. The researcher walked into a dental clinic and asked for the files of 50 denture users and 50 denture non-users, and just compared there. So the people in our treatment group were receiving the treatment as a result of their circumstance in their everyday life, something that they had already come by. And the denture non-users were already there. These were pre-existing groups.
Oh, right, because you told us it was an observational study. I forgot.
That's the key here. The key here is that this was an observational study, that they were not assigned. That's right. That in a controlled experiment, the researcher is assigning roles to everyone. But in the observational study, the two groups are already pre-designated by fate or destiny, if you will. So, because this is an observational study, we may observe that there are other pre-existing differences between these two groups. And what we want to think about is differences that are relevant to observing this response, and also associated with the treatment, so that it could kind of go in our lurking variable box, our mystery box. So can we think of any other differences between denture non-users and denture users that could be a possible explanation behind this?
Age?
Age, that's great. How many 20-something-year-olds out on a Saturday night do you see popping out dentures before they're having chips and salsa? That's not something we see at parties, right? So we see that denture users tend to be like our grandparents, right? So this tends to be an elderly population. Well, denture non-users are probably more likely to be the young, middle-aged at most population. So this is a younger population, and that's great. Let's just stop right here to continue to see if this would fit in our confounder box. Could being elderly make you more likely to wear dentures? Yes, that's what we just said, that elderly people are much more likely to wear dentures than the young people. okay, now so that works. We have our first connection, right? The elderly people are more likely to wear dentures. What about the response? Could being elderly make you more likely to die in the next 5 years than the non-denture users? And I would say the answer is also yes. As sad as it is, the older you are, the more likely you are to experience death in the next 5 years. So we could see how this confounder, this other variable, could explain why denture users are tending to die. But really it has nothing to do with the dentures. The dentures aren't causing death. The dentures are just hanging out with a bad crowd. Dentures are hanging out with old people, probably people with heart problems and other diseases, and they're more likely to be dying in the first place, whether or not they received the dentures. So, can we think of any other differences? Usually, I would list a lot of them. You know, you're more likely to have. When we only care about the relevant ones, right? Denture users are more likely to have gray hair than non-denture users. Denture users are more likely to listen to 1940s music than non-denture users. You know, that these wouldn't necessarily fit in our confounder box. They have to be relevant to explaining why the treatment and the response are observed together. So can we
something like genetics?
Genetics. Let's think about genetics. So, genetics. If we put genetics in our confounder box, would bad genes make you more likely to die in the next 5 years?
Mm-hmm.
I would say so. Some people have genetic predispositions to certain diseases and ailments. So sure, genetics could make you much more likely to observe our response of death in the next 5 years. So we're on a good start. But genetics also, to be a confounder, you have to be associated with both the treatment and the response. So would genetics be a likely, would genetics make you more likely to have dentures than the other?
But it wouldn't be the same gene, I guess. That's the problem.
There you go. That's a great point.
I see it now.
From a scientist's perspective, sure, some people might be more prone to have worse teeth than others, but what are the odds that the gene for good teeth also lies on the gene for
it would have to be the
a certain
same gene.
There would have to be the exact same gene, which is highly unlikely, right?
Yeah.
So in this
Can't be any
case,
old gene. Yeah.
right, it couldn't be just any old gene. So we would say here that genetics would be an unlikely confounder because the odds of the two genes responsible for early death relative in time and denture use or poor teeth, that would be a long shot there. Any other ones that you want to throw out and think about? I think we've got it pinned down with age. I think that is the most obvious confounder here. So the last thing to think about before we end this pre-lecture video is how do we avoid these confounders in our own experiments that we're conducting? Well, this is the main problem with observational studies. There's almost no way to avoid having confounders in an observational study because our denture users and our denture non-users are inherently different to begin with, because they were already divided by fate and circumstance and the same differences that put them in the treatment group and comparison group could also result in other differences as well. So that's the main problem with the observational study. So when we are conducting our controlled experiments, the goal for the researcher is to make our treatment group as identical to our denture group, our comparison group as possible. We want to have 0 differences other than the treatment and the response between the two groups. So that when we do see a response, we can go over here and investigate further and say, this looks like causation. This looks like the treatment is directly related to the response and there's no possible third variable confounding the study, the experiment, because there are no other differences between the treatment group and the observation and the comparison group. Excuse me. Do we have any questions before we sign off? Well, I hope that this has been informative for you, and I hope that you're feeling a little bit more comfortable heading into Lecture 2.